I'm an artist. My name's Leonard Koziansky, and welcome to my studio. This is where I work every day. And I'd like to talk to you today about a painting that I did in 2015 called Blue Jay Way. And it's 42 inches high by 26 inches wide. It's oil on canvas. And it began as all of my paintings begin, or most of my paintings begin, with a sketchbook drawing. But here was the drawing that I first came up with for this painting, this new painting, and it just seemed a little too complicated. I really liked the left side of the drawing. So I Xeroxed it, I folded it in half, and this is what it looked like, and I like this a lot better. Uh, Sort of focused the attention on the houses. I like the placement of the road and then that secondary road behind it in front of the church. Where I live in Annapolis is full of churches, and I'm a runner. I run every morning, and so, I wanted my drawing to have a runner in it. And so this is the drawing that I used to create my painting from. Then I blow it up to a larger size for my canvas. And I start by drawing a grid on the drawing, and then I draw a grid on my canvas, and then I use charcoal to create the drawing on the canvas. And, here's the charcoal drawing. And then I go over that charcoal drawing with ink lines because I'm going to tone the canvas because I like working on a toned surface. I don't care to work on a white surface. The white tends to bleed a lot of intensity out of the colors, and when you're working on a white canvas, everything that you put on the canvas is darker than the canvas. So I like to have things that when I put light colors on the canvas, I like them to stand out and dark colors to recede. So I tone my canvas. Then I darken the shadowy areas, the dark areas of the composition I paint with a dark brown, and then the light areas of the composition I paint with white. And so then I end up with this sort of foundation, this dark middle tone and light foundation that I can then put the colors that I eventually will use in the painting. And so here we can see, a painting near completion where the colors and the details are in place. And so this was the painting, Blue Jay Way. It's a surrealist composition. I'm a surrealist artist. My images come from my imagination, from my memory. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm combining the visual appearance of things along with my perception of them, my feelings about them, my memories of them. And I'm a runner. I run every morning with my running group. So when I did this painting, I wanted this painting to be about my experience, my life here in Annapolis, Maryland, and how I start my day at 6 a.m. In that transitional time between night and day when, I start off my run and it's often dark and the stars are out, and I finish it and the sun's up and it's light outside. So here in the foreground, it's illuminated by early daylight, and in the background, it's still nighttime, and we see the moon rising above the horizon. And here's the middle ground. This is the middle ground of the painting, and it's sort of where the action's at. And it combines natural light, that early morning natural light that's coming in from the left, with artificial light pouring out, streaming out of that house. And there's that little dog poking its nose out of the doorway. And when I begin my run in the morning, people's lights are still on inside the houses. And so there's a combination, a real interesting combination of artificial light, that warm, glowing artificial light, and then that cool early morning natural light. So having those two colors of light, the blue and the gold, makes a real interesting contrast, I think. And I just love the suggestion of warmth of that light coming out of the houses. Especially, it sort of contrasts with the crispness and coolness of the early morning air. And there's that runner running down the road. And So how do I draw these different things? Well, how am I going to paint them? Well, back to the sketchbook to figure out how I'm going to, draw that light coming out of or paint that light coming out of the house. And so then, well, how am I going to do the runner? Well, again, back to the sketchbook to figure out how I'm going to paint that runner. And so I had to do some drawings to try to figure out what his pose would be. This was the middle ground of the painting, with the light coming out of the house and the runner moving off into the distance. And here's the distance. This is the dark distance. This is sort of the nighttime distance, with the moon rising or the moon above the horizon, and the clouds, with the car coming down the road with its headlights on. And when I start my run in the morning, cars still have their headlights on, and it's a little dangerous. You have to be careful. And there's that stained glass window on the church, sort of glowing, and that required a special technique. I had to underpaint it with white and then glaze the colors over the top of it. And I'm going to talk about that technique a little bit in a few minutes here. And then there's that boat in the water and I live on the Chesapeake Bay. Annapolis is on the Chesapeake Bay, and I can see those boats early in the morning, anchored or moving on their way up to Baltimore. And when I first exhibited this painting, a couple of the people at the exhibition looked at the painting and they looked at the boat. And even though the navigation lights on the boat are tiny, they looked at those navigation lights and they said, "Leonard, those navigation lights are the wrong color." And so I had to take the painting back into my studio and make them the right color, because I don't want my boat to have the wrong navigation lights. Not here in Annapolis, where everybody knows what color those navigation lights should be. So, and then here's the middle ground again, a little bit lower. So you can see the houses and the trees. And there's a lot of trees here in Annapolis and a lot of small houses. It's a sort of an 18th and 19th century town. And there are a lot of churches here in Annapolis. And they give this town a lot of character. And here's the foreground with those birds, those blue jays flying in. And they're real interesting birds, a real flash of blue and white when they fly across the yard. And they're sort of aggressive birds, and they mate for life. And so I find them to be very interesting. But someone asked me why the blue jays, and I really had a hard time saying, because, my paintings are intuitive paintings. They, like I said, they're from my imagination, they're from my memory, and I try not to think too much about what I'm painting. I just want to paint what I feel, paint what I imagine. I close my eyes sometimes and I can see the painting right there, and I have to paint it the way I see it. Other times it develops on the page in the sketchbook. But why the blue jays? I'm not really quite sure. I've got a chart here in my studio of 50 different birds, and why blue jay? Sometimes I don't have an answer for those questions until years later. Again, back to the sketchbook to figure out what sort of pose I should give these birds. And so I did that with pen and ink on my sketchbook page. And here another bird. I figured that out with my on my sketchbook. And so here it is. This is the foreground with those blue jays. The name of the painting, Blue Jay Way. And again, how do I, my paintings have a lot of textures, a lot of physical textures. And if you were to rub your hand over the surface, they're kind of bumpy, because I want to create a glowing color, sort of a stained glass color. And I can't do that just by painting straight out. So what I have to do is first underpaint these different areas with pure white, creating a physical texture. Each little dab of paint is a raised little blob of paint, which when it dries will have a physical presence. And then when that's dry, then I can glaze thin layers of golds and blues. And so you can see here the road in the foreground over there down in the lower right is very kind of blue, because I had a blue glaze over that. And then I used a sort of golden yellowy orange glaze for the light coming out of the house. But it has a very, physical texture to it, along with the house. That house that the light's coming out of. If you look at the side of the house, it's blue and it has a texture. And I created that by underpainting it with white first to create the texture, then glazing the color over the top of it. And so here's the finished painting. Blue Jay Way, a surrealist painting, painted from my imagination about my life here in Annapolis and how I start my day early in the morning when it's still dark and gradually gets lighter as the day progresses. And when I finish the painting, I have to send it out into the world. But I need to protect it because you never know what's going to happen to your paintings when you send them out of the studio. Sometimes they're cared for very carefully, and then other times they're abused. They're just sort of shoved in an attic somewhere or down in a basement somewhere, and then they're rediscovered decades later. And so I have to prepare my paintings for whatever is going to happen to them. So I try to use very durable archival materials, and then I varnish the painting, and then frame it to protect the edges, because I never know where that painting's going to end up. My paintings have been places that I've never been before. And so I have to prepare them for that journey. And so I did that. I varnished it, I framed this painting, and then I sent it to the Willott Gallery, one of my favorite galleries, and they exhibited it, and they sold it to an interested collector, and that painting is with that collector to this very day. And so there's the painting, my surrealist composition, Blue Jay Way, about my morning run here in Annapolis. Well, thank you for watching this video and letting me talk to you a little bit about how I painted it and why I painted it and what it means to me and, where it came from and hopefully what people will experience when they see the painting in person. Thanks again.